I want to talk today about the notion of communication through language. At the heart of this is a conviction that underlies how I teach and study and think about languages, and that is that languages are fundamentally about communication. Now, that's kind of a basic claim, and I don't imagine for a second that anyone watching this video doesn't agree that the first and foremost use of language, whatever other uses come into it later on, is have to do with communication from one or more humans to one or more other humans. But I do think that in the study of languages, there are two different ways that we run the risk of losing sight of this truth, one of which is particularly common in the study of ancient languages, one of which is particularly common in the study of modern languages. So I think if we can understand each of those ways in which we have a tendency to go wrong, then it can allow us to correct our study of both ancient and modern languages to restore something of this correct sense of what language is about, which I think has many benefits for our ability to learn those languages and learn them well. So let's start with ancient languages. In ancient languages, we run the risk of forgetting that language is fundamentally about communication. In the tangle of declensions, massive verb charts, unfamiliar syntactical structures, and a vocabulary too often chosen to line up well with the text we're going to be asked to read or be tested on than with things actual humans might need to say to one another. In the midst of all of that, our sense of what the language is about shifts, and not that subtly, away from communication. To the student in the first or second year, Latin or Greek can seem more like a code than a language, something produced by an Enigma machine with the purpose of excluding others from being able to understand what is being said. Right? Codes are meant to exclude everyone except those who have the key from understanding what's being said. Languages, by contrast, are public. They are meant to invite all of those who have the requisite materials into that discussion. So when all of this happens, the student winds up inescapably, perhaps, believing that these languages, Latin and Greek, are systems of torture devised specifically to harm future generations and cause them to go insane when they attempt to study. Now, in the study of modern languages, we actually run the opposite risk. We tend to reduce language to merely transactional forms of communication. Now, to be clear, this isn't to forget that language is about communication, but it is to forget the scope of communication. The types of things you want to say in language are not limited to bare basic facts, like where's the bathroom, can you tell me how to get to this restaurant, and do I look pretty? Rather, the language is also meant to go after deep concepts that can only imperfectly be captured in words. It's meant to gather up emotional experiences that are resistant to speech, but nevertheless need to be expressed in some fashion in speech. And most importantly, it goes beyond expressible concepts to subtleties of connotation, innuendo, allusion, and ambiguity. Too often, translators attempt to remove ambiguity from a text in their translation, when in actual point of fact, ambiguity is one of the tools the author has at his or her disposal for creating meaning and meaning of a certain sort, and even for rhetorical and literary ends. And so, if the original text expresses an ambiguity, it's the translator's job not to resolve that ambiguity. That task lies with the interpreter. Rather, it's the translator's task to pass on that ambiguity so that the reader of the translation picks up on the same sort of ambiguity that the author intended the readers of the original to have. So, if we can keep in mind that both the language is about communication and what the scope of communication is, then we will not be content in our study of modern languages with a surface level understanding that doesn't dig into the subtleties of the different flavors that are communicated by saying things one way or another way. Too often in modern languages, students are told, no, that's not the way you say that. That's not right. Well, it may not be the right way to say the sentence that the student is trying to say. But an important question is it a right sentence? Is it a sentence that could be spoken, but that would just be an unusual sentence in that language? I remember once asking my German teacher about the difference between two ways of saying no in German, kein and nicht. And I said, why can't I say das ist kein Mond instead of das ist nicht der Mond? And he says, well, you can say that. It's a sentence you can say, but it wouldn't mean that's not the moon. it would mean something like, "That's no moon." Now, we all know that "that's no moon" is a very important sentence in English because of its use in Star Wars. But I think it's pretty important to know when you want to say, "No, no, sweetie, that's not the moon, that's the sun," versus "that's no moon," right? That's the Death Star. So the students sense the language is expanded and deepened when they learn not just "that's not the right way to say the sentence I've asked you to say," but rather, in addition to that, look at what you said actually means. Look at how that forms a different sentence and understand why that sentence, though sayable in that language, is not as likely to be said in that language. In ancient languages, when we don't allow ourselves to fall into the belief that these are not languages but codes, then we're able to approach these from the standpoint of our common humanity and to recognize that in spite of the great cultural differences that exist between us and an ancient Roman or an ancient Greek, and despite of the great temporal distances and everyday experiences that exist, the differences there between us and them, that there's a common core of a human reaction to and interaction with the world. There's a common core of human desiring, hoping, longing, striving, feeling, loving that underlies these texts. And when we can begin to see those aspects and to pull out the deeper connotations of those ancient texts, that's when we really enter into the world of the text. And that's when we really come to see with another person's eyes, to understand with another person's heart. And that's when we come first to full understanding, because understanding is, after all, in the end, an act of sympathy.